Morning, glory, America, bonjour, hi, Canada. Greetings to my friends in Israel. Hello to my friends listening in China, which is racked again by violence overnight in Hong Kong. In Israel, they have pursued and killed the leader of Islamic Jihad, a senior commander in Islamic Jihad overnight. That's the big news out of Israel. But the big news out of America is Deval Patrick going to run for president. Everyone's getting in because no one can win in the current Democratic field against Donald Trump. Now, Deval Patrick, I have to do a disclosure. He's the only Democrat in my life that I have contributed to. I just got to get that out there. It's opposition research. We just got to tell the truth. Deval is a classmate of mine. I don't know him well. I've done a few panels with him at reunions over the years. And back when he first ran for office in Massachusetts as governor, the class wanted to get 100% participation, so I sent him $100. So somewhere in the old records, you'll find Hugh Hewitt, Deval Patrick, $100. Nice guy, not a leftist. He's a sort of a classic liberal, and he'd actually be the moderate in the race. He'd be more moderate and more electable than Michael Bloomberg. He is dangerous to Donald Trump in the way that Elizabeth Warren is a gift and that Joe Biden is a gift. We shall see about that. Deval Patrick thinking about getting in because the field is so weak over there. Democrats are falling apart. And what are they doing as a response to falling apart? They look and they see Elizabeth Warren and Pete Buttigieg. And Pete Buttigieg, I think, is a very competent individual, very interesting candidate. But he used to go everywhere and do everything and fear no question. And he's hiding now because he's got some momentum. And that's not a good look for him. He only talks to the mainstream media as opposed to coming here or Fox News or things like that, where he might run into a serious question. Respectful, graciously asked, but a serious question. He's not doing that because he got momentum up to almost double digits. And he's counting on a play in Iowa. It said, you know, the consultants take over and you lose the reason why you ran in the first place. But all of them are going to get hurt by the opening today of Adam Schiff's sham show trial. And that's the hashtag you should use, sham show trial. It is absolutely absurd. There is nothing wrong that the president has done. There is no impeachable offense. There isn't even an offense. If you joined us yesterday, you heard me playing my clips from Sunday's Meet the Press show in our all-day long salute to the Semper Fi Fund, which I always do on Veterans Day. But I'm going to spend most of today on the impeachment, except for a conversation with David Rubenstein, who is saving Washington, D.C.'s historical monuments and got a great new book out, The American Story, of historians talking about things. David Drucker's coming along today. Mike Allen's coming along. Ryan Manion, author of The Knock at the Door, joins us. Tom Cotton is along. Matthew Elliott joins in the third hour, telling us what's going on over in Great Britain, where the Labor Party is just smashed into 1,000 pieces. It's a disaster. John Harris, editor-in-chief emeritus, I think, at Politico. And Hotline Josh, because I want to talk with everyone about my theory. Impeachment's going to destroy the Democrats. The American people do not like it. Here is what I had to say on Meet the Press yesterday, if you missed yesterday's show. Cut number...
Hugh, I know where you are professionally and personally on this, but it does seem as if congressional Republicans wouldn't mind a sacrificial lamb. And is it going to be Mulvaney or Rudy?
I've read those stories. I imagine it would be Rudy Giuliani. But I'm doing my best to read all the transcripts, and I have enormous respect for the Department of State. People know my son works there, and Mike Pompeo is a good friend of mine. So I'm trying to be very respectful of them. But what I see, I don't see any impeachable offense in the record thus far. I don't even see an offense. I see a back channel that the State Department has hated since Harry Hopkins went to England for FDR in 34 and 40, since Scali was involved in the Cuban Missile Crisis, since Kissinger went to China. The State Department hates back channels. And when they blow up, like Iran-Contra, they blow up badly. But there is nothing illegal. It's a policy dispute. And so we're on the verge of the first partisan impeachment since 1868. And I don't think the American people like this at all. Purely partisan vote in the House. That's what we're going to have.
I think impeachment in 98 was a partisan affair.
But it was bipartisan in the vote to send it, bipartisan in the vote.
Justin Amash voted for it, too, so that would make it...
Not a Republican anymore.
It would make it about as bipartisan as the other.
Justin Amash is not a Republican. He is a sort of a whack job out of Michigan. And I've said that for years. Rand Paul and Justin Amash are both parties of one. And but Donald Trump is a party of one, too. I mean, the president is in coalition with the traditional Republican Party, but nevertheless, in Congress, it is a bipartisan affair, except for the outliers in both parties. Both parties have one or two that are just off the charts. And without purchase in their caucus, and that is Justin Amott. And he left the party. So he's not a Republican. They will not get one Republican vote for an article of impeachment, and I doubt they'll get one in the Senate. It ought to be peremptorily dismissed. And I'll ask Tom Cotton about that later. Here's the second thing I said on impeachment on Meet the Press on Sunday.
I don't think it's the last.
Their problem is that this is something complicated, and it gets more complicated with all
Stop. I didn't set that up right. First, Chuck Tots, then Chuck Todd talks, then David Ignatius, very smart guy from the Washington Post talks. You just heard him. Then Yamiche Alcindor from PBS, very smart. And then I finish it up. So back to this guy.
I don't think it's the last.
Their problem is that this is something complicated, and it gets more complicated with all the names and faraway events. And here we had, one of the leading Democrats saying, we don't want to talk about quid pro quo anymore. That's too complicated. If that's too complicated, all the rest of it is too. Again, if there's a simple way to dramatize this, where these people sound like soldiers fighting our fight for us, and they got undercut, then it'll be different.
But Democrats have to deal with 2,677 pages of testimony to bring that to life. And as a result, they're trying to say, look, we need to change the languaging here, because for my cousins in Miami and other places, quid pro quo might be too complicated when you're running to the supermarket or you're going somewhere, rather than saying the president tried to bribe a foreign country to try to get an investigation into Joe Biden. That's an even more simple way that they're basically trying to make their argument.
Is there was no quo. The aid got there. You heard that from
That's the Tom Cole, which is, well, I didn't like any of this, but the aid got there.
But he's there.
I want to pick up on what David said. In the first two impeachments, there was a concrete act, a break-in and an affair in the White House with an intern on which you had a date stamp, a time, and the American people understood. Not only is that not here, there is a compelling argument that what the president did is just what other presidents do. And I am persuaded by this. I don't think the Senate, there will be an impeachment. They're going to send an article over, purely partisan vote. I don't think the Senate should take it up. I think they should reject the motion to proceed and never touch it. Otherwise, we will have this done again and again. Secret tryings, secret hearings, ex parte contact, just a bad
set of facts for the Democrats. Now, memo to the media. We will turn in the people who follow the news. We will turn in. I am hungry for impeachment news. I would love to have. I'm flying today. Flying to Chicago, where a plane slid off the airplane ground yesterday. I hope they put the salt down by the time I get there. But flying to Chicago, then on to California. Got to be in California for a week for the Richard Nixon Presidential Library Foundation annual meeting. And so, I talk about impeachment. We know impeachment. And I'm flying out there, and what I would like to have on my airplane is a live continuous feed from the Adam Schiff show trial. And what is amazing to me, the Brits have figured this out. If you go over to the Telegraph, which has become my go-to place for election news, you'll find that they have continuous updated coverage of the election. For example, I'm looking at 9:40 a.m. this morning in Great Britain. They published the latest figures from the Office of National Statistics showed that unemployment fell by 23,000 in the 3 months to September, and the average earnings increased an estimated annual rate of 3.6%. Jobs are good. UK unemployment remain at long-term lows. This is a great time for Boris and the Conservatives to be running, by the way, because give this economy to Jeremy Corbyn, and it will crash. They'd better vote Conservative, or they will crash the economy because Labor is run by crazies. But what they've got is a silo. Right, a silo on the news about the election. The very top is about the Labor Party says it experienced a sophisticated and large-scale cyber attack overnight. Boris Johnson's girlfriend, Carrie Simmons, has tweeted a photo of the couple's dog. All right, so that sort of thing. Attack on labor seems like a denial of service. The verdict from the markets desk that everything is great in the economy. That is a... They do things like that. Vacancies rate fell by 11,814. Vacancies means job wanted, applications wanted. They tell you the 10 seats that Nigel Farage is trying to get. He's backed out of the race. That's called a silo. So all the news is in one place online. They ought to have a silo for impeachment news. But the problem is that 95% of the Manhattan Beltway media elite hates Donald Trump and wants him to be impeached and removed. So they can't actually do a silo that's anything remotely fair. Okay, half the Congress doesn't want an impeachment, half does. Half of the people in the country don't want an impeachment, about 20% do. But my half that think this is a sham show trial don't have anywhere to go in any of the major newspapers because they are so tone deaf. to the half of the country that supports stopping the impeachment, most of which also supports Donald Trump, they are missing an enormous market opportunity. This is where ideology blinds people. If they were running a fair game anywhere in the media, a fair game, that would be the website that won. That just covered the news, what happened, because it's going to embarrass the Democrats fiercely, and they won't see it coming. Don't go anywhere, America. It's the Tuesday morning edition of the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Birch Gold Group.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns for break in 4 minutes and 15 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. The circus gets underway in the House of Representatives today, led by Adam Schiff, trying very hard to be serious, but it's a sham show trial, and nobody thinks it's other than that. It's a preordained conclusion. They're going to vote to impeach the president because they got nothing to run on. Nothing. The economy, national security, judges, all very favorable. The American people don't like the president's tweeting, but they'll get a lot of the tweeting, but they're also going to find out the Democrats have lost their mind. They really have. What do markets think about all this? Time for the pre-market report brought to you by Birch Gold Group. You can find out all about Birch at HughGold.com because they're the only gold people I work with. HUGHGOLD, HughGold.com. And I think everyone ought to have a little stash of precious metals in their safety deposit box just to run away with in the event that we have some kind of a cyber attack on the financial system. You ought to have cash and gold somewhere. If you can, and you ought to diversify your retirement accounts from the very risky to the very rock solid. The rock solid investment is gold and silver. And Birch Gold can send you a free info kit on how you can back up, get an IRA for a portion of your retirement. I don't think you ever place big bets on everything. You should be diversified. And diversification means from startups to real estate, if you've got it, to a home that you're in, to precious metals, all the way with mutual funds and individual stocks. You're like just a mixture of everything, so the ups and the downs come. But when big earthquakes come like 2008 and the S&P lost 50%, you know what held on to its value? Gold. So if you can't afford another roller coaster ride, you're too old for a roller coaster ride, Birch Gold will help you move your IRA into physical precious metals. Get a comprehensive 16-page kit on how gold and silver can protect your savings by going to HughGold.com, HUGHGOLD.com. Dow was up 10 points yesterday, NASDAQ down 11, S&P off 6. It was Veterans Day yesterday, so a lot of people weren't paying attention, but the markets this morning are all a little bit up. S&P at this hour up 3.5 points, the NASDAQ up 16.25, the Dow up 30. But I encourage all of you, HughGold.com, HughGold.com. Coming up after the break, David Rubenstein joins me. He is the author of The American Story. He is just a remarkable man. He's the founder and co-executive chairman of the Carlyle Group, and he's been methodically saving Washington, D.C.'s he bought the Magna Carta for the Library of Congress a couple years ago. He's a billionaire with a heart for history. And that's a good thing to be. So he's joining me to talk about his brand new book, The American Story, after the break. Very fascinating guy you probably haven't heard much about. Don't miss that. But I want you to take to heart, Eugene Robinson over at the Washington Post today has a column on the impeachment that's pending called Rank Partisan Solidarity is All Trump's Defenders Have Left. Now, Eugene doesn't do the headline. Eugene is one of the best pundits in America. He's a green room friend. That means someone I've only seen in green rooms, but I like him a lot, even though he's a University of Michigan football guy. He writes this morning, if President Trump is impeached by the House without the vote of a single Republican, you know what? He'll still be impeached, and for good reason. The same will be true if every Republican senator votes to acquit him. Partisan GOP solidarity might keep Trump in office for another year, but it neither changes the facts as we know them nor absolves Congress of its constitutional responsibility. A decision by Republicans to put party loyalty ahead of the national interest cannot be allowed to derail this necessary process. Do you know what that is? That's called getting ahead of the story. That's called getting ahead of the story. Because it is going to be a purely partisan impeachment. We haven't had one of those since 1868, since a handful of Democrats, 5 Democrats voted to impeach Bill Clinton. And there were Republicans who wanted, we're going to vote to impeach Richard Nixon. He resigned first. Andrew Johnson only had Republicans impeaching. And that was a partisan impeachment. It's the nightmare that the Federalist Papers warned about, a purely partisan impeachment. 45% of Americans oppose impeachment, 48% support it. It's R's and D's. It's a partisan exercise. That is not what it's supposed to be. And that 48% is going to fall away as witness after witness gets up and says, well, this isn't the way diplomacy is supposed to be handled or national security. You're not supposed to have, secret agent man running around Rudy Giuliani, to which the response is, we had secret agent man Harry Hopkins, we had secret agent man John Scali in the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis. They weren't secret agents. They were just back channels. Back channels are a feature, not a bug of American national security history. And Rudy being a back channel is not a crime, and no one can make it a crime. It's not a high crime or misdemeanor. It's not an impeachable offense. It isn't an offense at all. This is a sham show trial, and people should know that going into it. David Rubenstein is next, America. Stay tuned.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by No Safe Spaces.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 5 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 4 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 4 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Thank you for listening today. You know, I love talking with authors on the Hugh Hewitt Show, but this one's really special. The American Story is a brand new book, Conversations with Master Historians, and I've probably talked to most of the people that David Rubenstein talked to, but not at such length and not with such great specificity about one great American or another. David Rubenstein is one of the co-founders of the Carlyle Group, and I admire him mostly because he has been busy for many years saving American history with the Washington Monument, the Jefferson Memorial, getting a Magna Carta for the United States, redoing Montpelier, helping out at Monticello. David Rubenstein, welcome to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
My pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for having me.
I don't know if you remember, I saw you at the Carlyle Group annual meeting when Begala and I were doing a thing, and I told you, I didn't appreciate, though, you're becoming a very good interviewer. This is my job. I don't want anyone out there doing my job like you do my job. You're very good at this.
Trust me, you're a lot better than me. I'm an amateur.
Well, you're a very good amateur, and I'll tell you why. When you sat down with my old suite mate, the Chief Justice of the United States, John Roberts, I shared a suite with him in the White House counsel's office. You went right to the beginning. You went to junior high and high school, and Ulysses S. Grant said, don't tell me about the man, tell me about the boy, because the boy becomes the man. And I think you always make a habit, don't you, David Rubenstein, of starting in the early years.
It's interesting how much you can learn about people when you talk about their youth. And in that particular case, he said that I asked him, did he want to be Chief Justice of the United States or a judge or a lawyer? And he said, no, he only wanted to be, as a young boy, a historian. And his father said, well, there's no money in that. And he said, I don't really care. John went off to Harvard, came back from spring break, gets off in the airport, and gets into a taxi. And the taxi driver says, where do you want to go? John Roberts says, take me to Harvard. Are you a student there? Yes, I am. What are you majoring in? I'm majoring in history. Cab driver said, well, when I was a student at Harvard, that's what I majored in also. So John thought maybe his father was right. He did go to law school.
It's very charming. He also admitted to you, which I've never heard. I've known him for 35 years. I have never heard him admit before that he got a D in some class, probably for a conduct issue. Now, you and I both know David Rubenstein. He knows what that conduct issue is, right?
He does, but I would say generally he is a pretty well-mannered person, I would say. And by the way, when you worked with him in the White House, I was told on the first day that he was told the president was going to call him. And sure enough, he gets a call from somebody saying, hold for the president. And then he was holding for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 25 minutes. Finally, he hears laughter in the hallway. It was a prank. It was a joke to see how long he would actually wait to see whether the president was going to call him on the first day. The president doesn't call people on the first day, he later realized.
15 minutes he waited. I was not there because I came after him, and the joke they played on me, the rookie joke, was they piled my inbox with about 100 requests to defend the seal of the presidency of the United States, which is the most boring thing you can do in the White House counsel's office, is send letters to people. Anyway, I don't want to get off. I want to talk about what I think is magnificent. You have sat down with the best popular historians in America. Doris Kearns Goodwin gave me my first lecture at Harvard. I love Doris Kearns Goodwin. Walter Isaacson on Benjamin Franklin. Ron Chernow on Alexander Hamilton. Woodward on Richard Nixon. I've apologized to Woodward. I once banned him from the Nixon Library 30 years ago, and we've become friends. Robert Caro on Johnson. Tell me about what you think unites these historians in personality and approach.
Well, they all love the U.S., I'd say, and U.S. history, and what their job is to try to educate people about this great history of our country. Let me explain what I was trying to do in the book. The book is a series of interviews that I conducted at the Library of Congress, essentially in front of members of Congress. I had a goal of trying to educate members of Congress more about American history because they're making the laws, and they should know about how our history has gone in the past, good and bad. And it turns out that members of Congress are very interested in history, but they are not the principal problem. The principal problem is that we don't teach history and civics very much anymore, and as a result, 3/4 of Americans cannot name the three branches of government in a recent survey, and 1/3 of Americans cannot even name one branch of government. So it's a sad situation that we don't teach history and civics very much because of STEM and other things. Sadly, it turned out recently that the Woodrow Wilson Foundation did a survey, and it found out that if you want to be a naturalized citizen, you take a citizenship test in this country, 91% of people pass. The same test was given to native-born Americans, and in 49 out of 50 states, the majority of citizens who took the test failed. Only in Vermont did they pass.
You see, that is so stunning, and the American story will help with that. I sat down last week at the gathering of the presidents of the presidential foundations. I'm the president of the Nixon Foundation. Right. And the 14 of us got together, and David Ferriero, the very able archivist of the United States, came and talked about civics education, because the 14 presidential libraries are a place where it goes on, and they're all over the country, and they're bipartisan, et cetera. But this civics crisis is immense, and I think the American story, by talking to these presidential historians and, for example, Taylor Branch on Martin Luther King, this is a way to get the story out about the American story. But I want to pause for a moment about your efforts. Thank you. The Magna Carta, the Washington Memorial, Montpelier, which my wife and I, the fetching Mrs. Hewitt, went down there. That is a magnificent place where Madison basically redrafted the notes on the framing of the federal Constitution, where Dolly was. What got into you that you did this? You are like the private sector Smithsonian.
I came from very modest circumstances in this country, and I'm not sure in any other country with my last name, from the modest circumstances from which I came, I would have been able to achieve the financial success that I have. So I'm trying to give back to the country, and there are many ways you can give back to the country, of course, many different ways. But this is just one way that I'm trying to do so, by reminding people the history and heritage of our country, the good and the bad, and I call it patriotic philanthropy, giving back to your country in a philanthropic way. And I like to remind people that philanthropy is not just giving money. You can give back through your time, your energy, your efforts. And so people who don't have financial resources can give their time, for example, and that can be very valuable as well.
May I make one suggestion to you, David Rubenstein?
Sure, absolutely.
I think you ought to found the Rubenstein Prize for popular history and award it every year at a different presidential library, because popular historians are what's going to save civics in America. And just think about...
I'll think about it. Lots of people have prizes, and maybe there should be a prize for that, and I'll take a look into it. Thanks for the idea. Sure.
Because that's what you've got here. When John Meacham writes about Thomas Jefferson, he makes it accessible to anyone who can read. It's not an academic study. Alexander Dumas, it's great, 8 volumes or whatever it is, but no one can read that. Evan Thomas did a book on Nixon called Being Nixon, best popular history of Nixon, and I knew Nixon pretty well, that has ever come out. These people do the work that colleges and high schools have given up on.
Yes, these are people who are writing books. Very often they are not scholarly in the sense that these are books that would be winning PhD approvals if they were a PhD thesis, but they're books that the average person can read and can understand and enjoy, and that's what makes it so important to make sure people read these books. Sadly, 14% of the people in this country, adults, are functionally illiterate, so they don't read anything, and sadly, 30% of people who are literate do not read another book after they graduate from college. 30% of college graduates never read another book.
You see, that's stunning. It's not good for the arc of this country's productivity or its value of what it is. I went and saw Midway yesterday and I knew that John Ford was on Midway, but that's only because I had read a couple of books about Midway. They dramatized that. Most of the people won't understand that John Ford's a movie director and that he actually was on Midway as part of the Corps. Let me talk to you about A. Scott Berg. I have not read his biography of Charles Lindbergh, but my wife read most of it out loud to me in bed. She would read Charles Lindbergh and say, this is amazing, this is amazing. Why did you put in Lindbergh amid Abraham Lincoln and Ike and John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King and Alexander Hamilton. He's actually the only adventurer in here.
Well, at one point, he was the most popular and well-known person in the entire world because when he landed in Paris in 1927, the world was linked electronically for the first time ever. So his landing went all around the world. So Napoleon or George Washington, their accomplishments might be great, but when they occurred, very few people actually knew about them. But because so many people knew about Lindbergh, he was so popular. He was probably during his lifetime the best-known person on the earth. The book is a Pulitzer Prize winner from 1999, and it really goes. It was written in 1990 or published in 1999. Won the Pulitzer Prize. Interestingly, after 10 years of research on this, Scott Berg knows everything about Lindbergh. It's a definitive book. He thinks he's done the best job you could possibly do. After it comes out, somebody comes up to him and writes a letter and says, "You haven't done a complete research. What do you mean?" It turns out that Charles Lindbergh fathered 7 children with 3 German women that were never known by his other family in the United States or his wife, and it only came out after this book was published.
That is amazing. Now, there are other stories in here. Cokie Roberts talking about the founding mothers is fascinating. But there's one individual, maybe two, who have really impacted American culture. I think Doris Kearns Goodwin, Team of Rivals, has sunk into the consciousness of America in a way that's profound. But I think probably undisputably the person with the greatest impact is Ron Chernow, because his Hamilton gave birth to the musical, and the musical is working with David Rubenstein to reinvigorate knowledge of the founding. Aren't you amazed that Chernow did what he did and that then the musical became the musical? And Emmanuel, he just did such an amazing job.
Well, first, amazingly, this book was written by Ron Chernow. It's a terrific book, and I interviewed him about it. The book that actually won the Pulitzer Prize was George Washington, his biography of George Washington. And I often wonder whether there's George Washington is sitting in heaven saying, "Hey, I was the guy that won the Pulitzer Prize for you. I was the leader. Hamilton worked for me. How come he has a play and I don't have a play?" But in any event, Ron Chernow is a unique historian in that he writes books that are very popular, well-liked by the average citizen who reads them, but also scholars really like them. And his new book on Ulysses S. Grant is the same way. And I've interviewed him about that, and that'll probably be in a forthcoming book of mine. But I think that Ron is an incredible journalist and incredible writer. He was a journalist before he became a book writer. And his book on Alexander Hamilton, as you know, is because it's become a play, has really done more than anything else to educate young Americans about the Revolutionary War era of our country, which is a very good thing to do.
Now, let me close by doing what you do. Ask a little bit about David Rubenstein's childhood, because I think your mother knew my mother. Keep your law license. You might not be very good at this broadcast stuff. Where did you grow up, David?
I grew up in Baltimore in a blue-collar family. My father was not a high school graduate, nor was my mother, and I was an only child, and I got by on public education. My mother always thought I was going to fail the bar exam because she thought it was going to be too hard for me. I did pass, but after I left the law and started my investment firm, she kept saying, "Keep your law license because the firm might go under, and you need to have something to fall back on." So I'm still a member of the D.C. Bar.
You and me both. I still am. Now, which high school did you go to in Baltimore?
I went to Baltimore City College, which is actually a high school, the third oldest public high school in the United States.
And what was David Rubenstein in high school? You do this to the Chief Justice, and I always tell young journalists, if you can get to high school, you'll open someone up. What did you do in high school?
I was an okay student. I graduated at the age of 16, which is too young, and I was not a great athlete. I was not a superstar scholar. But I tell young people who are not superstars when they're young that the important thing in life is winning the second and third of life, not winning the first third. Because very often the first third, people win Rhodes scholarships and are Heisman Trophy winners or Supreme Court clerks. They often coast on the second and third of life, and maybe their second and third of life isn't going to be as accomplished as their first third. At least that's how I rationalize the fact that I got lucky in life and have been more successful in my second and third than my first third.
Well, David Rubenstein, you've also been very generous, and you have done a lot for America, and I appreciate it very much. The new book is The American Story, Conversations with Master Historians. It's a joy that people will take with them and read it. It is the best Christmas present I know of. David Rubenstein, thank you. I want now to tell you it's time for ReliefFactor.com. Doing the dreaded flying today, so I got to load up on ReliefFactor.com. I was out last night with my buddy Steve. He takes it every day. It has helped his plantar fasciitis. It has helped his back, and he and I were both trying to tell young people with problems that if they take these 4 pills every day, they will feel a lot better. It doesn't heal broken arms. And I didn't know that it would actually help the plantar fasciitis because that's a distinct condition that requires a distinct remedy. But it helps backs and aches and pains. It supports the temporary relief of minor aches and pains. I take it every day. So does Steve. And look, give it a try. Give it a try. $19.95. Get you a starter pack. Try it for, I think, 6 weeks. They say 3 weeks, but I think you ought to get started today. ReliefFactor.com. Stay tuned, America. It's the Hugh Hewitt Show.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns for break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns in 5 seconds.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. David Drucker joins me now. Good morning, David. How are you?
I'm great, Hugh. Thank you.
I have to read. The president has tweeted 8 tweets in the last 20 minutes, so I have to read them. So here they go. Why is such a focus on the second and third-hand witnesses, many of whom are never Trumper and his lawyers are never Trumpers, when all you have to do is read the phone call transcript with the Ukrainian president and see firsthand? He and others also stated there was no pressure put on him to investigate sleepy Joe Biden, even though as president I have an obligation to look into corruption and Biden's actions on tape about firing the prosecutor and his son taking millions of dollars with no knowledge or talent from a Ukrainian energy company And more millions from China. Now reports of other companies and countries also giving him big money are certainly looking very corrupt, to put it mildly to me. Biden should be forced to testify in this no due process scam. He continues, I will be releasing the transcript of the first and therefore more important phone call with the Ukrainian president before week's end. Economy is booming in caps, seems set to have another record day. Many people in Dhaka, no longer very young, are far from angels. Some are very tough, hardened criminals. President Obama said he had no legal right to sign order, but would anyway. If Supreme Court remedies was overturned, a deal will be made with Dems for them to stay. David Drucker, your reaction to that little bit of news?
I'm exhausted, Hugh.
You and me both.
Look, I think what's really interesting about this impeachment thing is that everybody actually, for a change, agrees on the same set of facts, but they have a different interpretation of them. Everybody's pointing to the transcript of the call, the summary transcript, to be very technical about it, and saying, see, he's innocent, see, he's guilty. And that, is what I noticed when I was interviewing the president about 10 days ago. He kept pointing to the transcript of the call. And as I've interviewed Democrats on the Hill about this, they keep pointing to the transcript of the call. And notwithstanding my sort of prediction that this probably just ends up like the end of the Russia investigation, with everybody in their corners and people in the middle sort of throwing up their hands, not sure what to do, I think that, to the extent that there can be any movement on this, it's about convincing persuadable voters that the transcript of the call was either innocent or evidence of an abuse of power.
Yeah, David, on Meet the Press on Sunday, I said the difference between this and Watergate and the Clinton impeachment is those two had time and date stamps on events. The burglary at the Watergate, the affair with Monica Lewinsky. This, they're going to say the telephone calls and impeachment, it's not going to fly. And so this is it's going to be a purely partisan impeachment. And today, Eugene Robinson has a piece in the Washington Post getting ahead of the story. It is going to be a purely partisan impeachment. Bill Clinton was impeached with 5 Democratic votes, so there was at least a patina of bipartisanship. There ain't going to be one Republican because Justin Amash left the country. I think this is dangerous political terrain for the Democrats. I don't think the American people want this. I don't think they like it. And the polls show that approval of it is declining and disapproval of it is rising very slowly. I think that will accelerate this week. What do you think?
Well, I'm not so sure, but I'm not so sure you're wrong either. I've said that impeachment is really unpredictable, and it's like dropping a gun, and it just starts firing in all directions. And I think that somebody's prediction is going to turn out to have been true, and they'll look like geniuses, but I don't really think anybody can know because this thing is fast-moving and it's unpredictable. And so it's very possible that this is going to backfire on Democrats. They're going to, rue the day they ever did it. It's also possible that public testimony, that more information ends up making this seem like it's more warranted, and it will end up being a problem for at least some Republicans, if not the president. And one thing, look, we have never seen, at least, we wouldn't have seen with Nixon, and we didn't see with Clinton. They were both in their second term, so you did not have anybody moving toward a reelection bid. And so President Trump, partisan or not, and it's going to be, I agree on that, a partisan impeachment. I don't think you'll get more than maybe 1 or 2 Republicans at the end of the day, if that. And you're not going to get very many in the Senate to convict him, if you get any. He's still going to be running for re-election, having been impeached, and it's different. And it'll be interesting to see how that impacts the race.
Now, I do believe as well there's a dangerous echo chamber here. The Manhattan Beltway media bubble has got like 5% of people who are pro-Trump in it. 95% of them hate Trump, and I think it's affecting their own understanding of the lay of the land. I went down to Tampa Bay last week with Prager and Gallagher and Phil Boyce. Hundreds of people showed up who love the president. Now, I'm not saying that is decisive. I'm just saying that it doesn't appear that Manhattan Beltway media elites know they're out there, even after the LSU-Alabama football game.
Well, I look, in defense of some of us elitists, we know they're out there. I mean, I think there's a difference between reporting on impeachment, which I've been doing for several weeks, and reporting on the campaign. And if you look at the stories from the trail, there are plenty of stories, and I was writing plenty of them myself before they stuck me on the Hill with this story, about the difficulty Democrats are going to have in the states that matter in loyalty to the president by the Republican base, and the fact that Republicans are sticking with him, Republican voters. So I think we're very well aware of this, but reporting on the information surrounding impeachment And the information that is coming out about Ukraine is one thing, and reporting on the campaign trail is another.
Yeah, and I think, though, that the impeachment reporting is not reflecting the depth and principled nature of the Republican opposition to it, whereas the American people share, 50% of them share that principled opposition to partisan impeachment. David M. Drucker on Twitter. Thank you, my friend. Coming back with Mike Allen from Axios. Don't go anywhere, America. It is the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Birch Gold Group.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 8 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 7 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 7 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 6 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 6 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 5 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 5 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 4 minutes and 45 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns for break in 4 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Hugh, I know where you are professionally and personally on this, but it does seem as if congressional Republicans wouldn't mind a sacrificial lamb. And is it going to be Mulvaney or Rudy?
I've read those stories. I imagine it would be Rudy Giuliani. But I'm doing my best to read all the transcripts, and I have enormous respect for the Department of State. People know my son works there, and Mike Pompeo is a good friend of mine. So I'm trying to be very respectful of them. But what I see I don't see any impeachable offense in the record thus far. I don't even see an offense. I see a back channel that the State Department has hated since Harry Hopkins went to England for FDR in 34 and 40, since Scully was involved in the Cuban Missile Crisis, since Kissinger went to China. The State Department hates back channels. And when they blow up, like Iran-Contra, they blow up badly. But there is nothing illegal. It's a policy dispute. And so we're on the verge of the first partisan impeachment since 1868.
All right, American Morning Glory. That is me on Meet the Press on Sunday. I'm joined by Mike Allen of Axios.com. His Axios AM this morning leads off with the argument that Republicans are going to argue that President Trump's state of mind doesn't qualify for impeachment. I think they're going to go much further. I think they're going to take my line. Good morning, Mike. How are you?
Hey, good morning. Welcome back.
Good to be back. What do you make of my line, which is, hey, this is a feature, not a bug, of American politics, foreign policy, national security, and diplomacy. Back channels have been there. They've always been there. And that this is an absurd circus by Adam Schiff.
Yeah, so what we see with the state of mind argument, and this is in an 8-page memo by House Republican staff going to the members who are going to be in the hearing tomorrow as impeachment heads into its public phase. Axios has popped up those 18 pages for you to read for yourself. But the advantage of the state of mind argument is, and they're going to argue that what occurred, as you do, was not impeachable. And the why it matters of that is that they don't have to fight the facts. There's so many facts that are corroborated by so many people. They're saying, hey, look at it differently. And that's very similar to what you're saying.
Yeah, it's a feature, not a bug, to call foreign leaders and say, hey, good job on this, but we need you to do that. That is a feature, not a bug. And sometimes that conversation occurs with the president. And sometimes Harry Hopkins goes to see Churchill. I said wrongly on Meet the President, it was 1940. It was 1941. Or John Scully sits down. You've probably sat in that booth over at the Willard, right, Mike Allen, where John Scully sat down with the Cuban head of KGB to talk about the crisis. That was not, he didn't hold any job.
So one of the great DC secrets, I think it's in the Willard Hotel, but I think it's Equinox Restaurant, right?
Yes.
And there's a booth with the John Scully plaque, the place where information was passed during the Cold War. You can request it, reserve it, just as at Martin's Tavern, where Hugh I have sat outside with you at Martin's Tavern in Georgetown. You can request the JFK proposal booth where the Senator Kennedy proposed to Jackie Kennedy.
There are some terrific places in D.C.
So much for our tourism interlude.
Well, I just had David Rubenstein on, the man who's rebuilding America's history, and so it's appropriate this morning. Mike, let me ask you about Axios and the impeachment. I look at the Telegraph every morning because they have a silo on election news that quickly brings me up to date on everything that's happened between Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn. Do you think America's media is going to cover this with the great amount of detail and links that I think it deserves? I think it deserves their own silo on their own front page, developments as they occur. But I don't quite see it yet, though you're giving it a lot of time in Axios AM. Are you going to create a silo over at Axios where someone like me can check up on what just happened, what just was said, where are the links, that sort of thing?
Yes. Axios, we call it a speed screen. So you go on Axios.com and right away you can see what's hottest, because we again and again, as we talk to people traveling the country, this is now an enormous cast of characters, and people are authentically interested, and it's the media's opportunity to make it easy to follow. So, for instance, at Axios.com, we give you the what's new and the why it matters, and then give you the power to go deeper. And we find a lot of people are going deeper on impeachment.
Let me also talk to you about item number 3 this morning, CEO's allergy to geopolitics. Look, this is impossible for them to maintain, Mike. I had a very vigorous discussion last night about LeBron James at dinner at Cafe Milano, and another Mike Allen haunt, which I've been to exactly once in the last 2 years.
That's a little fancy for me.
Well, I wasn't paying. I wasn't paying. So my friend Steve was in town. He took me to dinner. I said, let's go to Cafe Milano. It's in a lot of books. And so we went there, and we were talking about the People's Republic of China and how we are on the cusp of a new great power competition like the Cold War and the LeBron James episode. Well, CEOs like the Adam Silver, who runs the NBA, They may not want geopolitics, but geopolitics has come to them, right?
Yeah, no question. And just as domestic issues, including immigration and climate, that CEOs resisted in the past, they don't have any choice but to talk about them now. And this story points out that corporate America has not figured out how to talk about the Saudis. That after boycotting the Saudi regime's Davos in the Desert investment conference last year, this year they were all back, top companies, top CEOs, all in panels. And so the challenge for companies is, how do you take a moral stance when you have something like the Saudi case that is where they're trying to say that it's a mistake. It turns out to be a mistake in itself.
That is exactly right. And how do they get smart about that? I know that the best and the brightest of the tech companies have hired the best and the brightest of the Bush and Obama administrations to kind of serve as their counselors. That's not me. I won't do that because I'm a broadcaster. But is that the way to do it? Or do these CEOs themselves have to go immersive into history and politics?
No, it's simpler than that. Do the right thing. You stand up for what you believe in, and when there's an obvious case, say what's on your mind. An example of that, we point out in here that there are exceptions, and Ari Emanuel, the Endeavor CEO, the massive talent agency, returned $400 million of Saudi money in March. He's pretty lonely. There have not been a lot of other examples of that.
Well, let me give you the difficult one. That was the easy one. Here's the difficult one. If you are supportive of the Hong Kong demonstrators, as I am, and I assume you are, it may not be in their best interest to beat the drum, because the People's Republic of China is on a hair trigger before they mow them down in the streets. It actually may be to their benefit to modulate and walk a very fine line. I think that's what Trump is doing here. The president is not putting it in Xi's face. General Secretary Xi we don't want him to massacre Hong Kong people. So it's not always easy to figure out what to say, right?
100% can definitely agree on that.
So where do they get their advice? You see, this is the problem with a politicized DC. They can't go to anybody who's not all in on one side or the other and say, advise me. I think up until 2016, they could find people, maybe 2015, who were the wise old men or the wise young men and women of Washington, and get them to advise them. But increasingly in a blue-red country and a blue-red media, it's hard to find those people.
No, it's very hard. And these companies now have so many stakeholders. As I talk to CEOs, something that's constantly on their mind is potential employees, people they're trying to recruit. People come in for job interviews, and they don't just ask you about what your company does. They ask you about your company's values. And it's very important to prospective workers, to your current colleagues, to shareholders. And that's why the Business Roundtable very recently talked about having to embrace and pay attention to all their constituencies. And that includes their employers, that includes their communities, that includes their suppliers.
All right, Mike Allen, last story, creepy story of the morning, front lead paper, Wall Street Journal. Google amasses medical records on millions of people. And I joked on Twitter, not me, because I didn't opt in. Of course, they're not asking people to opt in, are they? And I think this will really creep out Americans when they realize their medical records have been collected by Google without opting in. What do you think?
No, absolutely. And there's a ton of this. There's going to be a lot more. This definitely is the tip of the iceberg. The Wall Street Journal pointing out that the data in this case, we're talking lab results, we're talking doctor's diagnosis, we're talking hospitalization records added up, and you've got a complete medical history.
And it's going to unnerve a lot of Americans. They did not say yes to Google. This is going to be the FTC. This is going to be the Department of Justice. This is the tip of the iceberg. Mike Allen is the place to go every single morning, America, to Axios.com to get his Axios AM newsletter. Always the best reporting in the morning comes from Mike Allen. Good to talk to you, Mike. Coming right back, America, 1-800-520-1234. Did you know Google had your medical record? Did you? I don't think so. Stay tuned. It's the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show brought to you by Sierra Pacific Mortgage. For more info, call 888-888-1172.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns for break in 4 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
"22 minutes after the hour, America." Welcome, it's Hugh Hewitt. Thank you for joining us. A few minutes ago, the president tweeted, "Economy is booming in caps. Seems set to have another record day." He's obviously referring to the stock market, so let's check that. Brought to you by AndrewandTodd.com. Andrew Del Rey, Todd Avakian are AndrewandTodd.com. They are with Sierra Pacific Mortgage. They lend you the money. Andrew and Todd are actually lenders. So when you fill out the questionnaire online at AndrewandTodd.com or you call them up at 888-888-1172, they get to work finding out how much money you can get out of your house to consolidate debt or pay for college or invest in a second property. Or if you're trying to buy your first home or your second or vacation property, they will qualify you. They'll give you a pre-qualification letter. AndrewandTodd.com, 888-888-1172. Sierra Pacific, they're the best. They're just the best. AndrewandTodd.com. Yesterday was a slow day, Veterans Day. A lot of people didn't go to work. Federal government didn't. But the Dow was still up 10 points, but the NASDAQ was down 11. The S&P just hung around in the red at 6. This morning, everything's a little bit green. The S&P up 1.25. NASDAQ up 6.25. Dow up 10. But overseas, everything was green. Japan up almost 1%. Hong Kong, even though violence continues to rack Hong Kong, up about 0.5%. England, about 0.33%. And so light crude at 57, gold at 14.54. The 10-year Treasury is creeping up, 1.94%, so it is time to go to AndrewandTodd.com today. Don't wait another day. I'm looking at that gold price as well, 1,454. Great day to get in with Birch Gold, and you can do that at HughGold.com. HughGold.com. Go there and get some precious metals for your safety deposit box or part of your IRA into gold and precious metal. Great entry point, as they say, in the business. As we await the world and see what happens out there, we just always got to be alert to what the world will do to markets. It's a very, very touchy day. Coming up after the break, I'm going to talk with Ryan Manion, the sister of Travis Manion, the Travis Manion Foundation. If you were at the Marine Corps Marathon, you saw a lot of Travis Manion Foundation runners. Terrific person. But first, let me go to the Joe Biden audio talking about Merrick Garland, cut number 8.
When we nominated a Supreme Court justice and it was decided that they wouldn't even hold a hearing for him, that justice, the reason I recommended him to President Obama, was that he, in fact, had gotten 35 Republicans to say great things about him, and he was a really serious person. I called 12 Republicans and said, "What are you doing?" 12 of my colleagues in the Senate. I was vice president now. I said, "You realize what you're doing to the Constitution?" They said, "We know, Joe, but here's the deal. Joe, I'm in a state where if, in fact, the Koch brothers drop in $10, $12 million, I will lose a primary." If you notice, Republicans lose primaries in red states and in purple states. And if I do that, I won't be. It's not about courage. Clearly not. But they know what they were doing was wrong.
Stop. That's a total lie. Ask him for the name of the 12. If there was a serious question, give me one of the 12. I can't do that because it didn't happen. Joe Biden just makes stuff up. By the way, why did Mitch McConnell say there would be no hearings and no votes no matter who the nominee is? Because of the Biden rule. Here's Joe Biden in 1992 on the Senate floor, cut number 9.
It is my view that if a Supreme Court justice resigns tomorrow or within the next several weeks, or resigns at the end of the summer, President Bush should consider following the practice of a majority of his predecessors and not name a nominee until after the November election is completed.
That's the Biden rule, and let's get a little of Joe talking about Hunter. Cut number 11.
Every single solitary, serious investigator, including your network and others who have looked at this, have said there's absolutely zero basis to the accusation that I acted any way inappropriately or that my son did. This is all about Trump trying to create a diversion.
That is simply a lie again. Does anyone not know how much wrong was done here? The appearance of impropriety at a minimum. The appearance of impropriety, which I, as the White House counsel, Department of Justice, I knew it at the OPM where I was general counsel and confirmed to run the agency as the deputy director. I know what the appearance of impropriety is and how it applies to every political appointee, and it was deeply, deeply broken in Ukraine by Joe and Hunter Biden. There's no avoiding it. I'll be right back, America, with Ryan Manion. Don't go anywhere. It's the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by No Safe Spaces.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 5 minutes and 15 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 4 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 4 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt in the ReliefFactor.com studio inside the Beltway. I spent all day yesterday talking with the wounded warriors of this long war, which began in 2001, that have been helped by the Semper Fi Fund. But today I want to talk to one of the members of the Gold Star family community out there. It's been my honor over 19 years to talk to a lot of Gold Star family members. What I tried to do yesterday is model how you talk to someone who's been wounded. Today I want to try and teach you how to talk to people who are a member of the Gold Star family community, because it's very difficult at first unless you know how to do it. Luckily, Ryan Manion, Heather Kelly, and Amy Looney Heffernan have written a book, The Knock at the Door. The Knock at the Door is about 3 Gold Star families bonded by grief and purpose. The Knock at the Door is riveting reading, and co-author Ryan Manion joins me this morning. Ryan, welcome to the Hugh Hewitt Show. An honor to talk to you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Hugh. Really appreciate it.
Would you begin by telling us about your brother, Travis? It's been my practice to always go right to the heart of the loss with a Gold Star family member.
Absolutely. My brother, Travis, was a first lieutenant in the Marine Corps, a graduate of the Naval Academy, class of 2004, and he was on his second deployment to Iraq when he was killed by enemy sniper on April 29, 2007. Recipient of the Silver Star and Bronze Star with Valor, and my best friend.
It is a compelling portrait of him in The Knock at the Door. I love his goals when he was going to high school: to be an All-American wrestler, first team All-Catholic in lacrosse, maintain a 3.9 GPA. I would have loved to have known him, and you've done an amazing work with the Travis Manion Foundation. But I want to get to the heart of it, page 42. You write, in the early days after Travis was killed, my decision-making was more impulsive than rational. Impulsive decisions can be catastrophic, and a few of mine have been, but they've also been a great way for me to channel my nervous energy. I think subconsciously, I believe that as long as I was doing anything, that I wouldn't have to acknowledge the intense pain that was overtaking my spirit and fighting to get out. It's sort of like when your leg is bleeding out in a stampede of intoxicated teenagers through the woods, but you're too hopped up on a cocktail of fear and motion to notice, if you catch my drift. That's wonderfully written, Ryan. How do you get out of that mode?
For me, it was about setting intentional goals. So after Travis was killed, and I find in a lot in the Gold Star community, a lot of what we do is like you set your sights on something. And that got me through for a little while, setting these goals. But then, you know, what I started to realize is that there was no intention behind them. It was just distractionary goals. And so I really started to think about not only what I wanted to do with my life, but what was the best way to properly honor my brother, properly honor this generation of men and women who have sacrificed, and be intentional about the actions in which I took to accomplish that.
And so what action, well, I know about the Travis Manion Foundation. A lot of people don't. Why did you start that? How does it work?
So the Travis Manion Foundation, we are one of the nation's leading veteran-serving organizations, and we work with veterans and Gold Star families across the country. And really our main mission is to empower veterans and families of the fallen to strengthen our communities across the country, to build character in our next generation. And we do that in a lot of different ways. But, you know, one of the biggest things we do is we go out there and we talk to our youth. And we have our veterans and our families of the fallen share their stories to drive the idea of servant leadership right here in our communities across the country.
Well done. Now, what made Travis Travis? You know, he is a hero, and people know that. But heroes don't just show up; they're made, they're formed. And in the famous movie Bridges of Toko-Ri, where do we get such men? Where did we get Travis from?
I think that Travis was incredibly blessed to have amazing mentors growing up. And that's why a lot of the work we do at TMF is focused on that idea of mentorship with our next generation. You know, my dad's a retired colonel in the Marine Corps, and my brother very much looked up to him. My uncle was an All-American wrestler, so he had that from the athletic side of things. And he was just really blessed to have strong teachers and coaches along the way that really helped form him into the young man that he became.
Now, Ryan, help everyone as the knock at the door tries to do. Talk to a Gold Star family member. What do you say upon meeting them for the first time? What do you know, people say incredibly stupid things. Rabbi Kushner told me, he wrote, when bad things happen to good people, show up and shut up. Just don't make it worse. People say incredibly stupid things. How do you recommend to civilians and others alike how to deal with meeting a Gold Star member for the first time?
Well, you know, it's interesting. I take the opposite. I say something, you know, and it's funny. I was just talking with our good friend Mary Catherine the other day, and we were talking about this idea of how you address the loss. And she said, there's nothing you're going to be able to say to us that's going to make us forget that our loved one died, you know. So I always say, number one, I'm very quick to say, I'm sorry for your loss. I'm sorry for your loved one's sacrifice. But more importantly than that, I always say that it's important not just to ask how they died, but ask how they lived. Just like you did, Hugh. Tell me about Travis. Who was Travis? And so that's something that I think we can all learn from. When we're talking and meeting Gold Star families, ask them about how their loved one lived, because those are the stories that they want to tell.
I'm so glad you said that. That's how I've adopted, because it's been an unfortunate feature of my life to know people who've suffered a lot of losses. And I do want to know about the absent person at the table. And I just think that's important in the Gold Star community when you're together, right? So when you're with Heather Kelly or Amy Looney Heffernan together alone, or Mary Catherine Ham, who suffered her own loss, a good friend of ours, as you mentioned, how often does it come up, your loss, and how often are you talking about the future?
I think it becomes just very conversational. We'll say, you know, I mean, just the other day we were sitting there. It was on November 9th, and it was Rob Kelly's, the 9-year anniversary of him passing away. And we both knew it all day. I was with Heather all day in New York City. But that night, I just turned to her and I said, this one's for Rob. And she looked at me and we just kind of knew. But, you know, more than that, we talk about what we can do to better ourselves to make sure that we live lives worthy of their sacrifices. And that's the three of us are very quick to say that at the end of the day, that's all we're trying to do.
Now, I think there's a problem, Ryan, agree or disagree with me, that the country is forgetting. They're forgetting the sacrifice that has been made by people who paid the ultimate price. They're forgetting our wounded warriors, which is why I do the Semper Fi Fund show. They're forgetting we're still at war. Do you find that to be the case?
100%. I think we have become desensitized as a nation, 18 years out. When Travis was killed in 2007, the reason there was a lot of news about him and people learned his story very quickly is because his story was on every cable news outlet. It was First Lieutenant Travis Manion has been killed in Iraq. And that was for no reason other than at that time, our media was highlighting these men and women that were losing their lives, rightfully so. Today, you know, we're almost to the end of 2019. Over 50 service members have made that trip from to Dover in a casket. And how many of us actually know one of their names? And that's a problem. And if we don't change that and make sure that this country continues to understand these sacrifices, to know these stories, to learn the stories of the men and women that are coming back wounded as well, I mean, we're only going to further the civilian-military divide that already exists.
It's deep. It's very deep. One of the key things the knock at the door does is to reintroduce the media to this subject. But are you getting booked? I'm curious if there's any appetite, because I do believe that mainstream Manhattan Beltway media elites are losing sight of this, but they are not in touch with the American people. The American people want to know these stories and want to honor their heroes, but they're not seeing it on TV, because I think the elites don't think it's of interest to them. I think they're wrong. Are you getting booked to talk about the knock at the door?
We've had some good press. We were able to have a piece on the Today Show. We actually went on Morning Joe.
Good.
Brzezinski did try to tie back us writing the book to Trump, but that's okay. But you know, at the end of the day, really, the book is more than just a book about Gold Star families, and the book is about for everyone that's going to receive a knock at the door. You know, we received our knock literally by service members knocking on our door to tell us the person we love the most has been taken away. But every one of us receives a knock. I mean, Mary Catherine received her knock a few years ago. It was a different type of knock, but it was a knock that changed her life. And so a lot of what we talk about in the book is like how, not about what form that knock comes in, but how you respond when that knock comes. And so I think, you know, that's really a little bit of how we're trying to position it with the media. And then, of course, when we're getting picked up, we're certainly telling them and educating them more on families of the fallen and our service members that serve and sacrifice.
Well, Ryan, I'm holding it up so people watching on Univision can see it. The Knock at the Door is really a book about courage. It's about the courage of the three fallen warriors that are described, but it's also about your courage, Ann Looney Heffernan's courage. She's the surviving spouse of Lieutenant Brendan Looney, a SEAL who was killed in Afghanistan. Heather Kelly is her surviving spouse of First Lieutenant Robert Kelly, who was killed in Afghanistan. It's about the courage of those men who were killed, and it's the courage of their sisters and spouses who are writing, and it's about courage. So I think people who want to know about courage should read The Knock at the Door. I thank you for writing. I think whenever I see the Ryan Manion people running in the Marine Corps Marathon, I just thank you for making sure you're making the effort to educate everyone. For every Gold Star family out there, every family member and every warrior who has fallen, thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate you helping to continue spreading the word about the work we do and having me on today.
Thank you, Ryan. The Knock at the Door. It is. I just pushed it out on Twitter, but you can't forget that title, The Knock at the Door. Go and get it. You'll be a better person for doing that. When we come back, I'm going to talk with Tom Cotton, himself a veteran who always honors Veterans Day. But I got to play for you as well, Don Cherry. Mr. Cherry is Mr. Hockey in Canada. He was encouraging immigrants to Canada to buy a poppy in support of veterans 2 days ago. Here's what he said, cut 16.
You know, I was talking to a veteran. I said, I'm not going to run the poppy thing anymore because what's the sense? I live in Mississauga. Nobody wears, very few people wear a poppy. Downtown Toronto, forget it, downtown Toronto. Nobody wears a poppy. And I'm not going to. He says, wait a minute. How about running it for the people that buy them? Now, you go to the small cities, and you know those, the rows on rows, you people love, they come here, whatever it is, you love our way of life, you love our milk and honey. At least you could pay a couple of bucks for poppies or something like that. These guys pay for your way of life that you enjoy in Canada. These guys paid the biggest price. Anyhow, I'm going to run it again for you great people and good Canadians that bought a poppy. I'm still going to run it.
Okay, he's anyhow, Mr. Hockey, and he said, you people, referring to new immigrants to Canada, he was fired because of that. Instead of focusing on the veterans he was trying to honor, the politically correct network fired Don Cherry. I can't believe it. I can believe in our sponsor, ReliefFactor.com. I do believe in ReliefFactor.com. Interesting conversation at the table last night. Two of the older guys, me and Steve, telling the younger guys who've got woes and aches and pains of their own that they ought to try Relief Factor. Maybe skeptical. Maybe they don't realize it. Your whole life, it's just a question of accumulation of aches and pains, and that you got to do something about them, including keeping the natural supplements that support the temporary relief of minor aches and pains at the right level in your body by taking it every single day, as I did in the first hour. And I remind people every hour to do it. Do not forget, relieffactor.com, relieffactor.com, $19.95 gets you started. So happy that the founders of relieffactor.com want to join me in supporting the Semper Fi Fund and making Pete and Seth Talbot I'm going to get them connected up with Wendy Lathine, who you heard on the show yesterday. Relieffactor.com, great company, great people behind it. Stay tuned. It's the Hugh Hewitt Show.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns for break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt in the ReliefFactor.com studio inside the Beltway, joined now by United States Senator Tom Cotton. Good morning, Senator.
Hey, Hugh. It's good to be on with you, and happy belated Veterans Day to you and the extended Hewitt family. I know y'all have a long record of military service that goes on to this day. So the Hewitt family, like so many families, military service is kind of a family business.
It is. It's not my family. It's the fetching Mrs. Hewitt's family. I'm just a civilian. But, yeah, up and down we do, and I'm glad I celebrated it yesterday and just talked with Ryan Manion in the last segment. And I'm glad you're on and remind people of that. Senator.
Yeah, and I did. Well, before we go on, I just say, the Semper Fi Fund show is always a highlight of mine. I'd encourage everyone to support that great organization. And November 11th may be Veterans Day, but November 12th is always a great day to remember that we should honor our veterans every day.
Absolutely. Now, let me tell you about November 12th as well, that we've got a big Supreme Court case today to be argued about the Dreamer program. It's an executive order program. That which is created by executive order can be withdrawn by executive order. I don't think this is a close case. Do you, Senator Cotton?
Well, it ought not be, Hugh. As you said, Barack Obama simply created the Deferred Action Program for these young illegal immigrants by executive order. But you have a lot of resistance judges in places like California and D.C. who have simply adopt the rule that which Barack Obama hath done, let Donald Trump never undo. But in the realm of real law, without resistance judges carving out special Trump exceptions to longstanding precedent, obviously one executive order can be undone by the next. This is not to say anything about the policy of the Deferred Action Program, Hugh. I supported legislation. In fact, I sponsored the president's own legislation last year that in return for assurances about building the wall and ending chain migration would have given legal status to many of these young illegal immigrants who came here as young children. So this is not about the policy. This is about the constitutionality of the president's actions. And I just see how the Supreme Court could rule otherwise.
I don't either, and I think it would be useful and good for the country if they did it in about a day. There are history books that are full of cases where the court moves expeditiously. This is one to lay down that rule. That which is done by executive order can be undone by executive order. Now, Senator, you and I often talk about China. Since we last spoke, the Vice President of the United States, the Secretary of State of the United States, the National Security Advisor to the President of the United States, all gave speeches about the People's Republic of China. They all were exceptionally tough. Your friend Mike Pompeo is joining me tomorrow to talk about his. Are we at a turning point?
I believe that one of the lasting legacies of Donald Trump's foreign policy will be to reorient our China policy away from engagement, accommodation, even appeasement that it's been for the last 25 to 30 years. Henry Kissinger has said that the true test of the foreign policy is whether it has bipartisan durability over the ages. That's one example, for instance, of why the Cold War policy of containment and ultimately victory under Reagan was so strong, as it started with Truman, but it continued under Eisenhower in presence of both parties. Our bipartisan policy of accommodation and appeasement over the last 30 years has obviously failed, but the president has laid the groundwork, I believe, for a new generation of a policy that recognized China as the military, the economic, the diplomatic and political threat that it is.
Now, Senator, I had dinner last night with one of the leading educators in the United States. I mean, he is terrific. Eric leads a bunch of private public charter schools, and they emphasize Western civilization, and it's a wonderful organization. He doesn't think they need to offer Mandarin. And I said, you can't defend the West unless you understand the people who might threaten the West. I don't think we have to have a war with the People's Republic of China, but I think we have to educate students the way we used to educate them about the Soviet Union. Do you agree or disagree?
I agree, Hugh. It is always important to understand the civilization, the culture, the history, the strategy, the outlook of other peoples around the world, especially our main adversaries. Just like we had a generation of great Soviet scholars throughout the Cold War, one would hope that we have a generation of great sinologists as well who help policymakers and the American people understand exactly the Chinese mindset so we can protect American interests against that mindset.
Now, understanding that mindset, I think, means learning Mandarin. Now, I'm doing my best to backfill by reading Michael Pillsbury and Graham Allison, rereading Dr. Kissinger. I'm not going to go off and learn Mandarin, but it would certainly help if our schools got serious about this.
Well, Hugh, I'm sadly monolinguistic, and some of my critics might say I don't even master one language. But,
well, you're from Arkansas, so you have two.
Learning Mandarin, certainly it's a hard thing, but it's a very valuable tool. It's just like learning Arabic if you're thinking about the kind of the threats that the world faces. So, it's a great thing that we have educators out there who are trying to encourage students to learn more foreign language. I regret that I'm monolinguistic. I wish I had mastered languages. I tried. I had great teachers, but it just didn't take in my mind. But it is an important part of understanding a different civilization, a different culture, to be able to read and to think in the language of that culture.
30 seconds, Senator. Is the president getting soft on Huawei, or is he still listening to you?
I believe the president recognizes that Huawei and other Chinese telecom companies pose a real and genuine threat to our security, to our privacy in their internet backbone business. Put aside their handset business where they sell cheap smartphones around the world, but letting Huawei build the next generation of telecom networks would be very dangerous for our privacy and security.
Senator Tom Cotton, always a pleasure. Happy Veterans Day and the day after Veterans Day. I appreciate your service as well, walking point in Iraq during the surge. Don't go anywhere, America. Hour number 3 of the Hugh Hewitt Show coming right up. I start with Matthew Elliott from Brexit Central. Don't go anywhere.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 8 minutes and 15 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 7 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 7 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 6 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 6 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 5 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 5 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 4 minutes and 45 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns for break in 4 minutes and 15 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Morning, glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Greetings to everyone. It's Hugh Hewitt inside the ReliefFactor.com studio inside the Beltway, where, of course, tomorrow gets going the Adam Schiff sham show trial. And the Adam Schiff sham show trial is not going to move a single vote in the House or the Senate. It is a purely partisan exercise, first time in our history. Well, actually, 1868 was a purely partisan exercise as well, the impeachment of Andrew Johnson. But when Richard Nixon got a bipartisan delegation telling him it was time to resign, it was bipartisan. When Bill Clinton got articles of impeachment voted against him, there were 5 Democrats voting with it. Not one Republican will vote for any of these articles. It is a show trial conducted in secret, infected with ex parte contacts, absolutely driven by leaks. A show trial. In the great tradition of show trials, that's what we've had. And now they're going to have part 2. But I'll come back to that because it's time to check in with our United Kingdom expert, Matthew Elliott. He is at BrexitCentral.com, one of the founders of the Leave campaign. And I'm checking in with him twice a week as we run up to 12/12. Good morning, Matthew. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Hugh.
I don't know that it's possible for a political party to have as bad a week as Labour did, but tell us about the week they've had and whether or not they're keeping it up.
Oh, it's been a terrible week for the Labour Party. You know, not only has Armistice Day, the equivalent to your Veterans Day, really highlighted their weak stance on the military and veterans in general, but also there's been good news for the Conservatives in the fact that the Brexit Party, Nigel Farage's Brexit Party, won't be standing against existing Conservative MPs. That gives Boris a free run in his 317 seats across the country. So a good week for the Conservatives, a bad week for Labour.
Now, let's talk a little bit about what Nigel Farage did. Explain it to an Anglo-American audience, because I think it's the beginning of a retreat that's going to turn into a rout for Brexit. I think they are basically pulling the plug nationally, but trying to do so at a dignified trot rather than a sprint for the back lines. What do you think?
I would agree with that. So over the UK, we have 2 major parties, the Conservative Party and the Labour Party, and we had a Brexit party set up by Nigel Farage, who felt that Theresa May, the previous Prime Minister, wasn't being robust enough on Brexit, and she wasn't. So he set up this party, did very, very well in the European elections earlier this year, topped the polls for the most number of members of the European Parliament, and he was threatening to stand against all of the MPs in the election in December. What he said yesterday was that he wouldn't stand his candidates against the Conservative MPs. So let's think of a US equivalent. Be a bit like some analogies here to what Ross Perot did to George H.W. Bush, where you have somebody who's very vocal, very articulate, taking away votes from the centre-right party. So the fact that Farage isn't standing is a big boost to Boris Johnson's chance of getting an overall majority on the 12th of December.
Now, he is, however, still pretending to stand in a number of swing constituencies where the Tory hopes to overtake the Labour member in a sweeping election region by region. Are those Brexit candidates also getting pressure to withdraw? Is Nigel going to leave the field entirely by the end of this month or early next month?
Well, we'll know for sure in about 48 hours' time, because all the candidates to be MPs across the country have to give their nomination papers in by Thursday of this week. And at the moment, Nigel Farage has said to his candidates, do not submit those papers until I tell you to, basically on the Thursday. So there's still a window of 2 days where he might sort of on a case-by-case basis take away Brexit Party candidates from other areas. But as you say, there's a deficit at the moment. The Conservative Party need to gain seats from the Labour Party and Liberal Democrats to get that overall majority. And I think those talks are still going on.
Because the DUP will not vote for Boris's deal. So if you want to get Brexit done, you have to make up for the DUP votes, which have left the support of the Brexit deal. That means they have to pick up, 20 swing constituencies minimum?
About 20 when you also factor in the Labour Leave MPs who are stepping down. There's some very, very brave MPs like John Mann or Kate Hoey. These are Labour MPs who voted Leave and then voted with Theresa May and Boris Johnson in the Commons. They're now leaving Parliament to be replaced by Labour Remain MPs. So, yes, there's quite a big deficit to make up. And also the DUP may be losing MPs as well. So this is still a highly sort of a situation in high flux at the moment. The polling is very difficult to analyse properly because there are lots of constituency by constituency results. But I would say that the news yesterday tips the balance from the most likely outcome being a hung Parliament with the Conservative Party as the biggest party to being a small overall majority with the Conservatives.
Now, talk to me, Matthew. We expect the 2020 election to be largely fought on the economy and the personality of Donald Trump. We don't hear much about the United Kingdom economy and unemployment, but I was running down the Telegraph silo this morning, and I'm amazed at your unemployment figures. You are at 3.6% unemployment. It fell by 23,000 in the last month of September. It looks like your economy's cooking. Why would anyone give it to Jeremy Corbyn?
Well, quite. And it's the old adage from your side of the pond. It's the economy, stupid. And I think lots of voters will feel it had 9 years of solid economic growth. Every month, 1,000 new jobs are created. We've basically got full employment at the moment. And at the same time, other European economies, most notably Germany, France, and Italy, are starting to slow down very, very rapidly. So I hope voters will think, who do we trust with the economy? Do we trust basically a Marxist party, because that's where their politics are coming from, certainly on the economy, or do we support the Conservatives, who are basically a business-friendly, free market party who have done a great job in the economy so far?
Now, Matthew Elliott, tell me a little bit about Boris Johnson, the prime minister, and his campaigning. I watch from abroad, and it seems to me like he's the ideal candidate for these times. He is photographic. He is fun. He is very Twitter-friendly. He is very social media-friendly. And it looks like he's got energy, which is what people want.
Absolutely. Well, I had the honour of campaigning alongside Boris in the referendum when I was running the Vote Leave campaign. He was our big cheese. He was our spokesperson. And I went around the country on the bus with him and trains everywhere. And the consistent thing that would happen is he would arrive at a train station or arrive at a town somewhere, and he would be mobbed by people who want to have selfies with him or his autograph. So he's he's a great campaigner. He's a bundle of energy. He is very, very positive, very upbeat. He inspires people. He's one of those people you want to be close to and have a bit of his charisma. So he's great on the campaign trail, and I think that's starting to feed through in some of the coverage as well. Like you say, he's doing very, very well on social media too, and that's helped compensate for the fact that the Labour Party tends to have more people on social media. So he's a huge, huge asset, and really such a contrast to 2017 general election, which had Theresa May as the leader of the Conservative Party, who really wasn't charismatic. It was quite grey, a very worthy prime minister in many ways, and I've got quite a lot of respect for her and the amount of commitment she put into the job, but an election campaigner she wasn't.
Let me ask a last question, very narrow gauge question. There's a small group of Leave exiles. Liam Fox, who's a friend of the show, for example. They were exiled by Boris, but they didn't leave the Conservative Party. They weren't exiled for voting against his deal. They voted for it, but they were exiled and out of the cabinet because they were insufficiently pro-Boris. How are they doing in this election? Are they 100% with Boris?
Well, Liam Fox has been very active, and he wrote an article over the weekend warning of the dangers of Jeremy Corbyn and talking about how Boris was the only person to be able to get Brexit over the line. And what struck me, talking to some of the people who weren't with Boris during the leadership election, is that actually they recognise actually he's been a much better prime minister than they thought he would be. They expected him to be a bit dithery, a bit undecisive. He really hit the ground running, though, and actually got the Brexit deal over the line. So their respect for him has gone up massively. I'm a huge, huge fan of Liam Fox. I noticed that we still have to choose our next ambassador to the United States. And I very much hope that when Boris Johnson thinks about the shortlist for that, names like Liam Fox's name will be on there. So I think
great idea.
A superb ambassador for the UK.
Quickly, Sajid Javid, is he your superstar in waiting, or is it Dominic Raab, or is it both of them?
Both are doing well. Dominic Raab has had a slightly lower profile in the past few months. So, of course, the PM does lots of the foreign office stuff. Sajid Javid has a good campaign so far. He had a great press over the weekend exposing the fact that Labour spending plans would add up to 1.2 trillion. So he's doing a good job as Chancellor, and I hope that when he's re-elected and there's a new Parliament, in his first budget, we'll see a really business-friendly, free market budget from Sajid.
Matthew Elliott, great to talk to you. Follow him at Brexit Central on Twitter, at Matthew_Elliott, 2 L's, 2 T's, at Matthew Elliott for everything you need to know about this election, which is so important to the United States and the United Kingdom on December the 12th. Don't go anywhere, America. It is the Hugh Hewitt Show.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 4 minutes and 15 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Thank you for listening to Hugh Hewitt Show. Former governor of Massachusetts, Deval Patrick, is reportedly considering a presidential run. I've known Deval since 1975, I think, at the Institute of Politics or something like that. We were classmates. We weren't friends. I barely knew him. I've done a few panels with him at reunions every year. He's the only Democrat to whom I've ever contributed $100. Because the class, I decided to kind of support him when he ran for governor the first time in Massachusetts, and they wanted 100% participation. I got touched by a few of our mutual friends. Come on, Hewitt. I know you're a Republican, but give to Deval Patrick. Good guy. So I did. That should end his chances right there. 1-800-520-1234. Time to check on the pre-market report brought to you by andrewandtodd.com. Andrewandtodd.com is the one-stop shopping center for good advice on what to do with your home if you've got one. Time to refinance, time to get money out to consolidate your bills, time to pay for college, whatever that is. If you got equity in your house, you got to find out. Or just refinance to save money or shorten the term. Also, the one-stop shopping center. If you're a veteran, you want a 100% down veterans loan. AndrewandTodd.com, also the place to go if you're a senior citizen, actually 62 or older, and you want a reverse mortgage on your primary residence. Never make another mortgage payment in your life. Still have to pay taxes and homeowner association. Maybe get equity out as well. Check with AndrewandTodd.com. They are lenders of the money with Sierra Pacific Mortgage. They are not a brokerage house. They just don't trade your information. Call them at 888-888-1172, 888-888-1172, or go online to Todd.com and fill out a couple of questions, and they'll be right back with you with the very best advice. Yesterday, Dow was up 10, the NASDAQ down 11, the S&P down 6. This morning, gosh, the S&P's at 0. It's not moving. NASDAQ is up 4 points. The Dow is up 9. Overseas, everything was green, and the 10-year Treasury is at 1.94%. Still time to get in when the 10-year Treasury is below 2%. Now, your 30-year interest rate, your 15-year interest rate won't be in the 2s. They will be, most of them, in the 3s if you've got good credit. And if you've got bad credit, AndrewandTodd.com will help you fix that credit. AndrewandTodd.com. I want to go back to Joe Biden talking about Hunter Biden last night on the CNN town hall. First, he promised to bring politics back to the norm. Cut number 10.
Because look what he does. You got Jeff Sessions in Alabama saying, please don't say anything negative about me, Mr. President. Please don't say anything negative. I know you don't like me. Come on. This is just, the politics has gotten just so out of whack. But it's going to come back and whack this guy. And when we're in the, anyway.
It's going to come back and whack this guy. What's that mean? I don't know either. It's just Joe falling apart, draining out. But then he got asked about Hunter Biden, cut number 11.
Every single solitary, serious investigator, including your network and others, have looked at this, have said there's absolutely zero basis to the accusation that I acted any way inappropriately or that my son did.
Stop. That's a lie. Many people, many center-left and center-right people have said the appearance of impropriety is indelibly imprinted on the Hunter Biden, Joe Biden story because he ought not to have gone to work for Ukraine. I don't know about the China story. I'm not following that very closely, but there's no way around it that Hunter Biden should not have taken that job, and that Hunter Biden told the New Yorker that his father knew about it. You said, I hope you know what you're doing. So he's lying. Go back to Joe Biden.
This is all about Trump trying to create a diversion. And if the big piece in the New York Times this weekend went through in detail the testimony from people I don't know, Republican appointments in the administration testifying before the committee. One of them saying that I couldn't believe, I know Joe Biden. He's a man of integrity. I don't believe this. There's not been a scintilla of evidence pointing out that anything's wrong. But there are people around him like that chump Rudy Giuliani. No, by the way, it's not a good. And the thugs that he has working with him, that I think there's overwhelming evidence that this was about Let me put it another way. Can you ever think of a time when a sitting president was deciding that he's going to make sure he gets to choose who the Democratic nominee is? Two things I've learned in the last couple.
That's not what the president was doing with 2016. Everybody knows it. You might think Rudy's controversial. I don't think America's mayor is a chump. Remember, he walked to the towers. He ran towards the towers. I don't know what Joe did. I hope he was that courageous. But I think calling Rudy Giuliani a chump is just a nightmare for Joe Biden. Stay tuned, America. It's the Hugh Hewitt Show.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 5 minutes and 15 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 4 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 4 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Welcome back, America. Hugh Hewitt in the ReliefFactor.com studio inside the Beltway. Joined now by John Harris. And if you follow him on Twitter at Harris Politico, you will know that he has been with Politico since he founded it, along with a couple of other friends of mine, Jim Van de Hei and Mike Allen, here on the radio. And now he's graduated to that elevated status of graybeard pundit. I think they've given him a column and demand that he actually work over there and go from editor to pundit. Am I right about that, John?
Yeah, I'm going to have to break a sweat again. I'm enjoying it quite a lot.
Tell us about the new gig and what you are supposed to do and the perch from which you are supposed to go forth an essay.
Well, thanks so much for asking. As you pointed out, I was one of the co-founders of Politico. So for the past dozen, really it's coming up close now to 13 years since we launched. I was fundamentally in the business of trying to start up a new media company. And then once we started up, to grow it and make sure that it was well managed. That season of my career I enjoyed, but I've always, I think, had the soul of a writer, and I've been eager to get back to that. And the place was running well, so other people can run it and deal with the budget and the personnel and the backed-up toilets and all the rest. I'm going to take on a column. We're calling it Altitude. My aim there is to signal that I'm going to try to get above the daily Washington firefight and explain some of the episodes that are dominating the news in some historical context, draw some parallels to things that have happened before, talk about some of the big ideas that are shaping history. Hugh, that's my view. I think it's probably close to yours that ideas are underappreciated force in shaping history.
And I tried to make that point on Meet the Press this weekend, John, when I made the argument that Rudy Giuliani, whatever you think of him, back channels are a feature, not a bug, whether it's Harry Hopkins in 34 or 41, whether it's John Scali at the Willard with the KGB guy in 1962 and the Cuban Missile Crisis, whether it's Dr. Kissinger going to China, whether it is Iran-Contra. This has happened again and again in American political history. You need some altitude. You actually need some book learning to appreciate this.
Well, you and I, we've been at this for a while. I first started as a journalist at the Washington Post in 1985. I was a local reporter for a number of years, but covering national politics now for a better part of a quarter century. And I think you do get some insights from that. Of course, the great hazard to avoid, and hopefully you'll stay on me and others will to make sure I do avoid it, is to not get stuck in the past or to rely on an old source network or to see everything through the prism of what's happened before, because then I think you'll blind yourself to what's happening now. But I do strongly feel that we need altitude in how we look at politics. I do also strongly feel that we need to revive the notion of a center, not necessarily the ideological center of splitting the difference, but some notion where we can have these arguments about where the country should go fundamentally in a climate of respect and goodwill, and arguing about common facts rather than simply attacking the motives of people who disagree.
You know, the assumption of good faith on the other side is sort of the cement of the body politic. But I've been noting, especially in the last 6 months, that the Geneva Conventions of punditry, where you assume good faith on the other side, are breaking down, if not totally destroyed. I wonder if you've noticed that, John Harris. Maybe it's the rise of the so-called media reporter and their need to dish dirt on people. But I do think that the Geneva Conventions of punditry, which are a respectful hearing, are gone.
Well, I've noticed those conventions maybe getting a little frayed for longer than 6 months. And it's not just a facet of punditry or of even media more broadly. We're in this phase as a country where a combination of technology, events in the world, and changes in media, a whole number of factors have put us in this place where the conversation is much more polarized. There's huge incentives for stating things in the most extreme ideological or rhetorical way. That's not new. It's been building for 20 years. I actually don't think we as a country are that polarized in historical terms. Nobody is going on the floor of the Senate and caning their opponent, as happened in the run-up to the Civil War. Nobody's blowing up math buildings, as happened in your and my lifetime. During the Vietnam protests, there's not urban riots. So in that sense, we're not really polarized. But I do think our public discussion is driven by malice and by an assumption of the worst motives on the part of those who disagree with us. I think that is what's historically new, not the fact that we've got big disagreements.
I also think part of this is ideology in the newsroom, the conventions of how one reports have changed dramatically. I want to read you a tweet. By the way, Twitter is a lot of this problem. It is the Beltway in 240 characters.
Sure.
Major Garrett just tweeted out, Trump impeachment. Americans hold negative views of Democrats and Trump's handling of impeachment inquiry in latest CBS News poll. This is where I thought it was going to go. The American people do not like this. John Harris, agree or disagree?
Again, I view this through the prism of Bill Clinton. Of course, I was covering that at the time. Newt Gingrich in the fall of 1998 said, I'm going to talk about Bill Clinton and the sex scandal and this abuse of power and this undermining of law every single day between now and the election. He did, and he was tossed out when Republicans lost seats in 1998. Bill Clinton's approval ratings were never higher than they were in winter of 1999 when he was acquitted in the impeachment trial. So what you're saying, Nancy Pelosi knows it. Chuck Schumer knows it. It clearly underscores the risks of this. That's not to say that I'm endorsing the notion that whether he should be impeached or he shouldn't. But I am acknowledging I think the truth that's reflected in those polls and in your comments and Major Garrett's comments, which is this is not really how Americans want to see Washington work.
No, it isn't. And I think we're going to find a track very similar to 1998, 1999 at the end of this. But I don't know that Democrats can get unstuck from this flypaper that they've wrapped themselves in. I do think the Senate, though, and I've been arguing this in the pages of the Washington Post, I want to know what your assessment of it is. I think Mitch McConnell can refuse to advance the motion to proceed, which advanced by unanimous consent when Bill Clinton was impeached. In other words, I think the Republicans have an opportunity to say, this process was flawed. We will not honor it. We will not encourage its repetition. We will not entertain these articles and refuse to proceed. And if the House wants to go back and do it again, the old-fashioned way under the rules that Clinton and Nixon were impeached under, fine, but we're not going to hear this. What do you make of that idea? Because the Reid rule has changed everything except legislative debate.
Yeah, Hugh, it's an interesting scenario. I have to say I find it unlikely. I think there are enough Republicans who are concerned enough about the substance of the allegations, whether or not they vote to acquit, that would be hard. That would be hard to do a summary dismissal of the sort that you're describing.
But let me give you the argument back.
That's not where my money is, to be honest.
I think there are three: Murkowski, Romney, and Collins. But I think Susan Collins would love to make a process argument. And I don't even know that Governor Romney. Now, Senator Romney wouldn't mind a process argument. I don't know about Lisa Murkowski. She went south on Kavanaugh, so I really don't know. But I do believe that it has, as to quote Dr. Kissinger, the additional benefit of being true, that the process is deeply flawed here, and that if you want to both satisfy the red state base and the blue state red cohort, you attack the fact that what Adam Schiff has done is without precedent. And maybe I should ask you from altitude, is it without precedent?
I'm not sure that I buy that it's that unprecedented, and I wonder whether those arguments that you have, which carry some punch right now, are going to be diminished a little bit once the hearing goes public later this week. Are people really going to say, well, gosh, this is an unfair process, it's being done in secret, it's being done without procedures, when it's wall-to-wall cable of the very people testifying in public? I think that argument, I know you make it in a sincere way, but it's going to be a little bit diluted after this week.
Well, you know why I don't think that's going to be the case, John, is because Adam Schiff made a huge mistake. He did not give the Republicans the witnesses they wanted. They asked for 8 witnesses. He said he would not give them at least 2 of them. At that moment, it's broken, because that was not the case in the other impeachments. You got any witness you wanted in Clinton. We never got to witness phase with Nixon because it was done by Jaworski. But the moment Adam Schiff, that's just fundamentally against American idea of due process.
Hugh, at one point where I do think you're onto something, which is that Republicans have a lot more flexibility in this process. Democrats basically are committed to seeing this through to the end. I don't see many Democrats not voting to impeach, and if it goes to trial in the Senate, I don't see many Democrats not voting to acquit. They just don't feel they have the latitude within their party. Republicans have lots of off ramps. They can, as you say, well, look, turn the argument to process. The process was unfair. They could say, look, I've been troubled by these allegations, but I don't think they warrant removal from office. So I actually support a censure of something else that would be some gradation of disapproval. They can calibrate their response to this all the way up to, I think it's fine. I agree with President Trump. There's nothing here, and the call was perfect. They've got a greater menu of options than Democrats do.
All right, last question, John. I'm actually thinking from the perspective of altitude 30 years out. What's better for the country at this point? To have a purely partisan impeachment with, straight party line votes in House and Senate, or to get it off the plate of the Senate and get back to real stuff?
Well, we're a democracy, and so things are always better when they are put before voters and voters decide. So that's plainly my preference. And I would say that the larger question that we're discussing this morning, which is like, how do we get back to a more normal functioning politics in which people can assume good faith on the other side? I don't think that's going to happen until one side or the other in this debate. We've basically been a political jump ball for the past generation. One side or the other is going to gain the upper hand. I think that's what's happened historically. For 20 years or so, Republicans had the upper hand after Reagan, a good 30 or 40 years after Roosevelt and the New Deal coalition, all the way up to the 60s. They had the upper hand. For the last 20 years, we've been in this place where there's a kind of a conservative liberal argument, shirts versus skins, and really neither side fundamentally dominating the debate.
And I think we'll see that in
election.
Yeah, we're going to have a 3-state election. It's going to be Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. They're the only 3 jump balls left, in my view, in the country. And I'll keep talking about it with John Harris of Politico, editor-in-chief. Follow him on Twitter at Harris Politico. I'll be right back, America. Thank you, John. But I'm off to the airport after the show. There's ReliefFactor.com. I'm ready for my my loading the bag above and below the head. And I've got a bag of books. I got some books I got to take back to California with me. I'm going out for the Nixon Foundation annual board meeting. And the fact means it's a long day of travel, a long day back to Cleveland. I got to go to San Francisco in between for a speaking event. Lots of going on, and all of it means Relief Factor, Relief Factor, Relief Factor, because if you don't take it every day, it isn't going to protect you from the worst twist that you really do in your ordinary living, which is to put luggage into an overhead bin. And, of course, the airlines have incentivized us to do that. So relieffactor.com is my constant companion on the road. I'm loading up right now enough to put in my backpack that I don't forget it when I've got so much in California, I don't need that. Relieffactor.com, 1995 gets you started, gets you on the road to feeling better. Pete and Seth Talbot put it together. They've done all the work. You don't have to make a guess as to what kind of Icarian, curcumin, resveratrol, omega doses you need. Just trust Relief Factor to do that for you and trust that it works. We were talking about it at dinner last night, and it does. It really does. Josh Kraushaar is next, politics editor of the National Journal America. Stay tuned. It is The Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of The Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Birch Gold Group.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns for break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns in 5 seconds.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt, joined now by Josh Kraushaar, politics editor of the National Journal and the ReliefFactor.com studio inside the Beltway. Follow Josh at Hotline Josh. High stakes begin tomorrow, Josh Kraushaar, with impeachment hearings. It is a sham show trial, in my view. I think the American people hate it, and the CBS new poll seems to show that. I think Democrats are stuck in fly paper. What say you?
Well, look, I look at that CBS poll, but it was 27% of people who said that they could change their mind. I kind of look at it a little differently because 27% of the public that's undecided. That's actually a lot of undecided voters in the way people operate in politics these days. So look, if you're going to have about an hour straight of both Schiff's opening remarks and then the council, the committee council on the Democratic side asking the witnesses questions. So, that's going to be the opportunity. If Democrats have a moment, if they're able to have a viral moment or have something that really is captured for the evening newscast, it'll be in that opening hour. I agree with you, Hugh. I don't think a whole lot of people are going to change their minds. People, are so locked in their ways these days. But look, this is a made-for-TV show, like you said. It's going to be a total. Schiff is going to put on a show. And whether it's good or bad for Democrats, we'll see. But there are enough people out there that the needle could move a little bit.
Now, I think they've made a fundamental error. When they told the Republicans they couldn't have the witnesses they wanted, including Hunter Biden and the whistleblower, they've inevitably, invariably, indelibly tarnished their process. That never happens in any other proceeding in America which is contested. You get to put on your defense. They're saying, no, you don't get to put on your defense. I don't care how many star witnesses they have. That was a huge error by Adam Schiff, in my view.
Schiff's challenge is to avoid coming across as partisan. I mean, and Pelosi knows how important the appearance, at least, of bipartisanship in this process is, because for there to be any chance of impeachment or for it to be politically advantageous, at the very least, for the Democrats, there needs to be bipartisan support that something went badly amiss with our foreign policy. I think they have a good. I mean, I think given the opening statements, I've been reading a lot of the transcripts from diplomats, people who are nonpartisan, people who have, I think, the nation's best interest at heart. I've seen some damaging testimony in the private hearing. If they can say the same thing publicly, and Republicans don't really get any don't raise any questions effectively, I mean, I think that could be a good week for the Democrats. But the biggest challenge, as you allude to, Hugh, is that if this comes across the partisan, food fight, no one's going to move the political needle, and people are just going to tune off the television.
Now, I was earlier arguing in the Washington Post. I argued with a couple of Republicans this morning. The most important thing for the Republicans to do in the Senate is to say no to the motion to proceed. In 1999, there was unanimous consent for the motion to proceed to the articles of impeachment. It is entirely likely that the Republicans can refuse to do that, not give 60 votes to approve the filibuster of the motion to proceed, and then use the Reid rule to change it. I think it's in your face, and it's what Mitch did with Scalia. What do you think of that suggested approach?
I think that's very risky, and I'll tell you why. Because when you look at the polls, people are divided over impeachment and removing Trump from office. But the clear majority of Americans believe that there is something that needs to be investigated. And if Senate Republicans, and keep in mind there are at least 5 or 6 Senate Republicans up for re-election in blue or purple states, if there's a perception that this is just being railroaded, I mean, they're not giving the time of day to what we see in the House hearings, I think there are a lot of independent voters and even some soft Republicans that might turn on Republicans, might turn on.
Here's my counter.
And I think there's a real risk of trying to brush this under the rug, given that there is a clear majority of people that are concerned with what they've heard from these phone calls.
I think if I'm Martha McSally or if I'm Cory Gardner, and I have to thread the needle of keeping my red base happy and telling the blue base that, there's a lot I disagree with the president, but I insist on due process. If the House will repair the damage it did, reveal its ex parte contacts, allow the Republicans to call the witnesses they want, and stop the leaking, I will vote to hear articles of impeachment, but not until. They can start over if they want and then refuse. I don't know how they lose. If I'm Martha McSally and Cory Gardner, I'm begging for that.
Well, that's not. They take McSally out of the picture, but in the case of Collins, Gardner, to some degree Ernst, that's not how they're proceeding. I mean, they're keeping mum. They have in certain instances criticized the president's behavior as per the president's remarks. That they're trying to get to the point where they can say this was bad, but it's not impeachable. That's the McConnell endgame, I think, right now. They're going to be trying to hold a partisan firewall against any kind of removal from office, hold the troops together, but they want to have the swing state Republicans acknowledge misconduct. They think that's a big problem, and a lot of voters in their states view the president's behavior as a problem. So, the game for McConnell is to get folks anti-impeachment, but to acknowledge at least that there was some misconduct.
I disagree with you. You know what? I don't think that. Did you watch the LSU-Alabama game? They're trying to do an impeachment with 100,000 people doing a 10-minute standing ovation for the president. That's just nuts.
That was Alabama.
And Louisiana fans. But remember, that doesn't divide by party. It doesn't divide by age. It doesn't divide by race. It is multi-ethnic. It is a red state. And the people who are running in red states, Martha McSally, Cory Gardner, and even Susan Collins, but definitely David Perdue and Tom Tillis and Joni Ernst, that should have sealed it for them. They want no part of this, and they ought to say it. Josh, always a pleasure. Follow him at Politics Josh on Hotline Josh on Twitter. Thank you, Dwayne. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Ben. I'll talk to you tomorrow from California, America, on the next Hugh Hewitt Show.